Great, good afternoon. Welcome to this month's Interior Museum Lunchtime Lecture. It's my privilege to be introducing a couple of colleagues who the Interior Museum works very closely with here in the Interior building. My name is Diana Ziegler. I'm the director of the Interior Museum, and I'll be introducing Steve Floray and Elizabeth Varner, both staff curators with the Interior Museum program. Just to be a little confusing, we're very similar in our titles, but they are very, very much more broad in their scope than we are here at the Interior Museum Collection. And they'll be talking to you about how the entire department manages their millions of collections all over the country. So they'll be giving you a very broad sense of what it is that the Interior holds, our encyclopedic collections, but then also how the complexities of managing those collections arise throughout our federal system. Steve Floray, again, staff curator, he has been a curator with the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior for 25 years. Prior to his current position, Steve worked at Zion National Park, the USS Arizona Memorial, the NPS Washington office, NPS Pacific West Regional office, and numerous parks nationwide. He also served as chief curator in the Georgia State Park system. For the past 16 years, he's worked on a number of museum fire safety, security, and disaster planning initiatives as well. And Elizabeth Varner, in addition to her current position as staff curator, she teaches museum and cultural heritage law class at Robert H. McKinney School of Law and a business museums class at Johns Hopkins University in their graduate museum program. Previously, Elizabeth has served as the executive director of 2 museums, and that was for over 7 years, and has worked, published, and presented on cultural heritage and museum administration issues, as well as legal issues impacting cultural cultural entities and cultural heritage. So please welcome Elizabeth Varner and Steve Floray.
Well, thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone. So we just wanted to give you a snapshot of the Department of the Interior's museum collections, and I'll bet you didn't know it, but the Department of the Interior has probably the largest museum collection on the planet. And if we're the only occupied planet, then the solar system. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what our office does in support of the 10 bureaus and offices in the Department of the Interior that manage our museum collections. So what are those museum collections that are managed by the Department of the Interior? What are they? How many of them are there? What are they made up of? Why do we have them, and where are they? Well, the museum collections the Department of the Interior manage are an amazing cross-section, really, of humanity itself. They tell the story of America, its history, its natural history, and all the peoples that occupied what is today the United States. So we have things like Frederick Douglass's Bible. We have Lincoln's coat. We have this amazing fossil from Bureau of Land Management managed lands in Utah, the Diabloceratops. Had to practice that. As well as fine art such as Thomas Moran's majestic view of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And these are just some of the more photogenic collections, and we have in excess of 195 million objects, scientific specimens, and archival materials. So once again, we hold these items in trust for the American people, and there are 10 DOI bureaus and offices that manage our museum collections nationwide. So what are these museum collections, and why do we have them? Well, our museum objects in our collections are acquired according to a documented need, usually a plan such as a bureau unit's scope of collection statement, its general management plan, its interpretive plan, and these items are managed to be preserved, studied, and interpreted for the public's benefit. So what are some key characteristics of our collections? Well, a couple of items here. We have this amazing Native American basket, and I'm not sure where this geological specimen came from, but these are just a small snapshot. And so some key characteristics are items that may have been commissioned by a bureau. For instance, the Bureau of Reclamation has a large art collection that they actually had artwork commissioned for the construction of various dams. There's actually an amazing picture that Norman Rockwell painted of the Glen Canyon Dam under construction. So it's really a diverse collection. They could also be items that are found on federal lands. Items that are identified by the Bureau or unit in support of the Bureau unit's mission. They could be items such as archaeology or paleontology collections that are collected on DOI-managed lands during research or resources management projects. They could be associated with a significant event, resource, or person, such as Frederick Douglass's Bible. They could be rare or unique, like those amazing fossil collections, or they could be significant due to their age. So what is not museum property? Well, some of the things that aren't museum property that we might have out in the bureaus are working collections, and those are scientific collections, but they differ from the specimens that are in our museum collections in that the items in our museum collections are retained permanently. Working collections oftentimes are not, because they were gathered in response to a specific research project or proposal, but then the researcher did not need to retain them after analysis, or perhaps the project consumed the specimens in analysis. For instance, there may have been some destructive testing done that actually the specimen, after the information was gathered, the specimen was no longer whole or useful. But also, oftentimes, it's important for us in the museum community to be working with our scientists to poll them to see which of those working collections perhaps are actually, even though they weren't going to be retained, if they've been retained for a long time, then we need to move them into our permanently retained museum collections. Other items are like living history collections or teaching collections that are used for interpretive programs, for hands-on activities with school kids. A lot of our bureau units have traveling trunks. The National Oregon Trail Museum out in Oregon, that's a Bureau of Land Management site, they have a traveling trunk, and a lot of NPS and Fish and Wildlife Service refuges have traveling trunks that go out as well. So those things aren't museum property. Another item that is not museum property are the vast majority of records that we generate here in the department. Most records that are generated in the actual business of government, at the end of their useful existence to the agency, then they're either retired or they go to the National Archives. There's a small subset of those records, though, that may be retained if they are associated with a museum collection. For instance, resource management materials, field notes, photographs from archaeological or paleontological research that are done out on DOI lands. And of this 195 million plus collection, the largest single component is archives, making up 65%. The second largest component is archaeology, and then the smaller, the other 6 disciplines are quite a bit smaller in comparison to those two. Now, archives are so large because when you think about the DOI agencies that have been around for so long, and the fact that we've only brought in archivists into DOI bureaus within the last 25 years or so. So they've got a lot of work catching up with all the archives that have been generated in the last, well, some of our DOI agencies go back close to 200 years. And then once again, they also vary by bureau. The National Park Service has the largest number of collections, which you can see at almost 170 million, down to the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement has a small collection of 53 items. And then the other 8 bureaus that manage collections are somewhere in between. And then also we have a huge increase in the size of DOI's museum collections in the past 16 years. And once again, this huge uptick, a lot of this is the identification of new archival materials in the field, as well as archaeological materials that have been generated by research on DOI lands, as well as a project we're involved in right now working with our partner repositories, which Elizabeth will be talking about in a minute, where there are a lot of materials that were taken off DOI managed lands over the last 100 years that we didn't really know about, because oftentimes it was done locally between personnel at a DOI unit and a researcher from a university, and oftentimes if there wasn't paperwork done or the report went missing, those archives that we're discovering, we didn't know about it. So we've had a huge increase in the number of collections over the last 16 years.
Thank you, Diana, for the introduction, and thank you, Steve. So why does DOI have museum collections? Well, as I'm going to discuss, we have museum collections because of certain laws and collection generating activities, which Steve just touched on. So why does the U.S. government own and care for museum objects? Laws are one reason, such as the Antiquities Act of 1906, the Archaeological Resource Protection Act of 1979, the Paleontological Resources Preservation Act of 2009. This is just but a small sample of the laws that require us to own and care for museum collections. When we get further in the presentation, we're going to give you a website which includes some directives which have a longer list of these laws. Now, pursuant to these laws, we also have a host of regulations, such as the curation of federally owned and administered archaeological collections, 36 CFR 79. And we also, beyond that, have department manuals, such as 411 DM, identifying and managing museum property, as well as a whole host of DOI museum property directives, which really govern the care of these collections. So how do we come up with 195 million objects? That's quite a bit. Well, these are just some of the ways that we obtain these objects. We have permitted archaeological, paleontological, and scientific research. We have permitted compliance activities, so dam construction, energy construction, road construction, any of those projects you hear about on federal land, they could generate some collections. And to a lesser extent, Bureau resource management projects, or as Steve discussed, identification of previously unknown collections and repositories. In just a little bit, I'm going to get into repositories, and when you see the number of repositories and the number of objects, you can see how there might be a few that are missing. And to an even lesser extent, donations. So, 195 million collections. Where are these collections? Well, some of them are all around us. Just coming into the main interior building, you've seen some of them, whether they're in the hallways, in conference rooms, the interior museum. So we have some there. We also have some in some repositories. So a repository is a facility that is dedicated to managing, preserving, processing, studying, and providing access to museum collections according to professional museum and archival practices. So on this screen, you can see a few of those. You can see the storage. On the left-hand side, you can see some conservation at work. And then in an earlier image, you saw someone using the collections, the access portion. So we know overall what is a repository. But within this large umbrella of the term repository, we have some smaller designations. Pretty much Bureau repositories or non-Bureau repositories. So for instance, we have universities or colleges, the museums or the departments. So for instance, if someone was getting a permit for research, they might have some of those collections in their department. Alternatively, some of those collections might also be in a museum. Other museums around the United States have some of our collections, whether it's at the state, county, or private nonprofit museums. Some of them are at the Smithsonian. They might not be labeled, but they might be our collections. And then we also have federal agencies that serve as repositories. So the DOI has a variety of repositories, such as the Bureau of Land Management Anastasi Heritage Center. We also have repositories with other agencies or departments, such as the USDA Bee Biology and Systematics Laboratory at Utah State University. We also have repositories with local government agencies, Indian tribes, and other educational or scientific institutions. So there's quite a variety out there. Now we have this lovely map up here, and you can see that we have over 2,000 Bureau facilities nationwide. And if you could get a little closer, and I believe this presentation is going to be available later, you'll be able to see that this is broken down by bureau. And you can really see where some of these Bureau facilities are concentrated. Most of them are out west. These repositories can be in visitor centers, museum storage facilities, headquarters, ranger stations, and an assortment of other areas. We also have the benefit. Tracy Bates gave us this image, and a huge thank you. You can see a map of some of our non-Bureau repositories. So what is going on with this relationship between the bureaus and the repositories? Well, the U.S. government owns these museum collections. That was the law part we had talked about a little earlier. The bureaus are responsible for preserving the collections for future use, and the repository wants to house and maintain the collection and has the ability to do so. Another benefit of this repository system, as you can see with the proliferation of repositories across the United States, this really does promote access and allow people to reach these objects more easily. This relationship is shown in this triangle. So you see we have the landowner manager, the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Reclamation, and Bureau of Land Management, our 5 land managing agencies. We also have the collector. So the collector goes to the landowner manager and requests permission to collect these objects, or they should. This generates a permit. Part of the permitting process includes the collector going to one of these repositories and ensuring that they will take the collection to care for it after they are done. This is the agreement to house these collections. And then we have a third prong of this triangle. This is the agreement between the landowner and the repository. So all those directives and department manuals we were talking about that govern the care of the collection, the inventories, what have you, to make sure those collections are well cared for and have access. That's another agreement. So with over 2,000 Bureau facilities, 900 non-federal partners, and 10 bureaus and offices, we have a lot of partnerships and energy going on. So it keeps us busy, as you might imagine. And one interesting thing is with this 195 million objects, a little over 23 million of the objects are in non-federal or non-bureau repositories, and the remainder, the bulk, the vast majority, as you can see, of nearly 172 million objects are in bureau facilities. Now, different bureaus have different methods with their repositories. So for instance, if you look on the far left, you can see that the Park Service has more repositories within the bureau than without. You can see BLM, though, utilizes non-bureau repositories to a greater extent than bureau repositories. So how can you impact DOI's collection? Each and every one of us is probably going to be impacting these collections. As Steve told me beforehand, at the very least, we're going to be working with archives or generating them. So let's discuss how we're impacting them. Do you work with or impact real estate that houses museum property, the building, the office space? Museum collections are in many DOI facilities, and objects require special environmental controls, even if they are located in hallways or that conference room. So if you work with a facility space, this is very important for you to know, and to know what we need with the temperature, humidity, and light. Objects require special handling and cleaning. So sometimes these objects are damaged by a lot of love. So if you see someone in a museum collection object and you just want to dust it off or clean it, if you could help call the curator or the person in charge of that object, we would be gratefully appreciative. A lot of these objects also require special security. So the security staff have a very important role to play, but we each have an important role to play. If we see a museum collection object and someone walking down the hall or messing with it, we should kind of keep our eye out on that and contact security or the curator to make sure the proper person is handling the object. Do you work with or impact personal property? So museum property is a subset of personal property. The federal government splits things into federal or real estate or personal property. So anytime there are policies impacting personal property, museum property is also impacted. And as you'll see when we get to the website, or when you go to the website, we have quite a few directives and ethics that might not fit perfectly. So please keep the museum property in mind. Also, if you're working on an agreement that impacts museum property, a contract, a repository agreement, an MOU, these directives also need to be followed and considered when crafting that.
So another way you may impact collections is if you're involved in emergency management response or disaster response. For instance, if a facility includes museum property within that facility, then the overall facility emergency management plan needs to consider the museum collection as well as those steps that are to be taken in the event of an emergency. Our office also includes museum emergency management training as part of our annual museum training that we deliver for the bureaus each year. And once again, protecting the collection is everyone's responsibility, and especially in an emergency. So it's critical that we all communicate before an emergency happens so that we know what to do if we can during an emergency. Another way that you work with collections is if you teach or communicate using collections, or maybe you could do that if you're not already. Bureaus and offices have access to millions of objects and images of natural and cultural resources. Once again, these objects and images and archives tell DOI's story, our mission, and promote important messages that we share with the public through exhibitions and communications and other media. At the same time, issues about natural resources are often relevant to cultural resources as well. So we need to consider the whole gamut. And here we've got a couple of ways that we communicate through exhibits. This is at the Anasazi Heritage Center that's maintained by the Bureau of Land Management in Colorado. And this is one of the National Park Service's Teaching with Museum Collection lesson plans, where you can actually go on to their website and get information that's curriculum-based materials for teachers using museum collections. So these are just a couple of the ways that we use museum collections. And there are a lot of other ways. So for instance, if you're involved in research or resources management or even communications, there are ways that you can work with the curatorial staff at your bureau to use museum collections for further outreach opportunities, and we want to facilitate that as much as possible. So are you interested in history, science, culture, fossils, and much more? Well, as Elizabeth said, we have exhibits here in this building that are managed by the Interior Museum, as well as the Bureau of Indian Affairs has exhibits on various floors. We have facilities across the nation, National Park Service visitor centers, refuge visitor centers. Bureau of Land Management has 3 museums. The Bureau of Reclamation has a number of visitor centers, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs has a few museums as well as all of our partners and many items that are online, either maintained on online exhibits by the various bureaus or by our partner facilities or our partner institutions. So what are we doing to protect, preserve, and make our DOI's collections more accessible? Well, as Elizabeth talked about, earlier, we work in our office on museum policy and guidance for our bureaus and our partners. We also help with training and technical assistance. Another way that we assist is that we make funding available each year for a competitive project funding program, as well as funding interns out at the bureaus. We help with repository assessments, and we're involved with oversight of Inspector General and Government Accountability Office audits that deal with museum issues. We also publish an annual report each year that synthesizes all of the accomplishments and challenges that each bureau reports every fiscal year, and we use that data to put together an annual report, which is up here. Those are all available on our website. And this is an instance of one of our online training programs, as well as in-house or training at our repository partners. So what can you do to make and protect our collections and make them more accessible? Well, once again, using and promoting our collections they could be applicable to just about every job we do. Keep an eye on the collections, as Elizabeth said. Ask questions, and once again, get involved. We're always looking for volunteers to help. So if you're interested in volunteering to help preserve and protect America's heritage, you can always check in with your local curator at your DOI unit. I'm sure the Interior Museum can use some additional volunteers, so you could always check in with them. Your local park or refuge as well. So there are a lot of opportunities, and it's really good to get a good cross-section of people involved in the museum process. We're always looking for help. So once again, our website, we have a host of information on our website, and then you could contact Terry, Elizabeth, or me for additional information about our program and our initiatives, and we're always happy to help.
Thank you all for attending. We're going to stay up here and answer any questions you might have of us.